Hello art lovers and welcome to another episode of History of Renaissance. Make yourselves comfortable as on today's episode we will speak about one of the best known artists in history whose work and contribution is celebrated and studied to this day by artists and art historians with continuous interest and admiration. I am of course referring to the great Donato di Niccolò di Bettobarti, known as Donatello. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any episode of our series about history of art and history of cinema. Are you ready? During the 15th century, Italy, with Florence as its most important city, was a center of artistic and humanistic ideas and innovations. Very important technological advances also took place during this period. Renaissance culture looks to courageous ideals from antiquity and promotes the study of the liberal arts, centering largely upon the individual's intellectual potential. Early in the century, the Medici family rise in power, and their colossal wealth and influence in politics and culture transforms Florence into the center of artistic ideas and growth. Huge advancements are made in medicine, engineering, architecture, literature, and of course, visual arts. This is a period that Donatello, a very humble and simple artist compared to the other artists of his lifetime, flourished. Often described by his peers as arrogant and hard to deal with, Donatello most of the time didn't collaborate well with other artists or with patrons. This brought him many problems, especially as it was an era of collaboration and a time when guild masters regulated artists' working conditions. Though other artists detested him, Donatello managed to leave his mark and undeniably become one of the most important artists that marked the 15th century. Donato, as was his real name, was the son of a wool carder named Niccolò di Bettobarti. He was born in 1386, and not much is known about his childhood. It is suggested that he learned stone carving from one of the sculptures of the Cathedral of Florence. From 1404 to 1407, he became a member of the workshop of Lorenzo Ghiberti, for whom we spoke in our previous episode. His first notable work, David, is said to have been created during these years, with a great attribution to Ghiberti as well. His David was first intended for the Cathedral of Florence, but in 1416 it was transported to the city hall Palazzo Vecchio, where it stood as a patriotic symbol for the greatness of the city. The commissioners asked Donatello to make some adjustments to the statue so that it looks less than a prophet. An inscription was also added to it. The Marble David is the first impressive work of Donatello, and it hints to the innovations and his style which he adopts later on. Although the positioning of the legs is an example of contrapposto, which means in relaxed position, the figure stands in a classical Gothic lean, another proof of Ghiberti's influence. According to scholars, the head of Goliath, lying at David's feet, is carved with great assurance and reveals the young sculpture's genuinely Renaissance interest in an ancient Roman type of mature, bearded head. Donatello's David stood for a long time as a symbol of power of the city of Florence, until it was replaced in status by Michelangelo's gigantic David in the 16th century. Other notable works from his early years include the impressive seated marble figure of St. John the Evangelist, finished in 1415 for the Cathedral of Florence, and the wooden crucifix finished in 1408 for the Church of Santa Croce. It is believed that the later one was made during a friendly challenge with another Florentine artist and architect, Filippo Brunelleschi. Donatello carved Christ as a real person, rather than an idealized figure. This shocked Brunelleschi and claimed that Donatello had carved a peasant but not a god. Later on, when Donatello was invited to dinner by Brunelleschi, he threw all the food on the ground, causing Brunelleschi to ask him, "What are you about, Donatello? How are we to dine when you have dropped all the things?" "I," said Donatello, "have had enough. If you want anything, take it. To you it is given to do Christ, and to me, peasants." His rivalry with Brunelleschi and his eventual depart from Brunelleschi's methods produced a hostility between the two. Brunelleschi became so upset that he even composed epigrams against Donatello. After the success of his works for the Florence Cathedral, Donatello received more commissions for more work, including two important sculptures for the Guild Church of Fort San Michele. He became known as the first sculptor to utilize new concepts derived from early Renaissance. He incorporated mathematics, science, and architecture into art, including one-point perspective, anatomical accuracy, and even created a signature form of bas relief for his carvings to emphasize depth and three-dimensionality. Around 1430, the head of the Medici family, Cosimo de' Medici, commissioned him to make a bronze statue of David. This resulted in the first freestanding nude statue made since antiquity. Because of the homoerotic features that the statue displayed, rumors started to spread that Donatello was actually gay. The fact that he never got married only strengthened this statement. Sometime after his death in 1480, Angelo Poliziano, a well-known scholar of the time, wrote stories about how Donatello had intimate relationships with his apprentices and how he employed only beautiful young men and stained them so that no one else would want them. When in 1433 his patron Cosimo was imprisoned by rival families, Donatello traveled to Rome and lived there for the whole year. There he created two important works, the tomb of Giovanni Crivelli at Santa Maria in Araceli and the Ciborium at St. Peter's Basilica. Both works reinforce the classical influences which was his trademark by that time. Upon his return to Florence, he took up projects for the Florence's Duomo and the cathedral in nearby Prato. The next years marked a period of huge success for him. As Vasari recalls it in his books, he was most liberal and courteous, and kinder to his friends than himself, nor did he care for money, keeping it in a basket hanging from the ceiling, where his workmen and friends could help themselves without saying anything to him. In 1443, Donatello was summoned in Padua in order to sculpt a funerary monument for the condottiero Erasmo da Narni, who was known as Gattamelati. The monument was the first equestrian statue since ancient Rome. Donatello did most of the work between 1447 and 1450, yet the statue was not placed on its pedestal until 1453. The statue gained such fame that the King of Naples wanted Donatello to make a similar statue for him. Although he was very much appreciated in Padua, Donatello couldn't live away from Florence for a long time and insisted on returning. During his last 3 years in Padua, he had a number of important offers from Mantua, Modena, Ferrara, and, as I mentioned, Naples, but nothing came of them. It is believed that he was experiencing a crisis that prevented him from working related to him being unhappy with his life in Padua. He also suffered from illness. In 1456, the Florentine physician Giovanni Chiellini noted in his account book that he had successfully treated the master for a lengthy sickness. His health problems were even reflected in his later works. His once powerful and impressive bodies had now become weakened. The statues created towards the later period of his life reflected his internal psychological battles and emotional strains. During Donatello's absence, a new generation of sculptors had emerged in Florence. Their style and new techniques deemed his work to be outdated. With this transformation in Florentine taste, Donatello's commissions came now mostly from outside Florence. These include the dramatic bronze group Judith and Holofernes and a bronze statue of Saint John the Baptist for Siena Cathedral, for which he also undertook in the late 1450s a pair of bronze doors. The project was unfortunately abandoned in 1460, most probably due to financial reasons, but it is said that it would have rivaled Ghiberti's doors for the baptistery. Two reliefs which survive to this day from the project can be seen in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Upon his return to Florence, Donatello set up a workshop where he trained young artists. The Medici appreciated his work and respected him to such extent that before his commissioner Cosimo died, he asked his son Piero to continue to care for Donatello. Although he was given a farmhouse in Cafaggiuolo, Donatello couldn't stand the rural life and soon returned to the city, where he passed the rest of his life as a friend and servant of the Medici without trouble or care. He spent his last years creating 2 bronze pulpits for his now older masters. The great artist died before finishing the project on 13th of December 1466. Covered with reliefs showing the Passion of Christ, the pulpits are works of impressive spiritual depth and complexity, even though some parts were left unfinished and had to be completed by less significant artists. Donatello's place in history was acknowledged mainly by Vasari, who claimed he may be said to have been the first to illustrate the art of sculpture among the moderns. In history, he is recognized as one of the masters of Renaissance, along Raphael, Da Vinci, and Michelangelo. His innovations in perspective and sculpture during the early Renaissance contributed greatly to the overall foundation of what would become the flourishing Italian Renaissance. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this episode. If you want to watch more about the history of cinema or the history of art, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification button. See you soon!